The election's over. We did not win. But I want to take some time and actually give you context into my thinking before, during, and now after with this whole campaign and run. But before I get into any of that, I have to say thank you. It's really hard to do this as an independent outside of the parties. So all of your help and support means the world to me, and I am eternally grateful. So deciding to run as an independent is certainly a non-traditional way of getting into politics, but I have sort of two tracks for my reasoning on this. One is ideological, the second is strategic. So ideologically speaking, I've never felt like there's a singular party that has a monopoly on good ideas. I have been a registered Republican in the past, but I've always been pretty independent-minded, and I've been a registered independent for some time now. I don't inherently have an issue with the two-party system. It has worked for us for a long while. The data shows that there was a lot more like bipartisan work going on in our legislative bodies. But that's just not the reality right now with our political climate. Right now, partisan politics is a true threat, because when you don't have governing bodies that can simply get anything done because of this zero-sum game and division, that's a threat. Now, the strategic reason why I did this, it really all comes down to gerrymandering. North Carolina is one of the most heavily gerrymandered states in our country right now, and sometimes I take for granted, because I'm living and breathing politics, not everyone really understands the full nature of it, so I'll just briefly explain. By the way, both parties are guilty of gerrymandering in North Carolina now. However, it is at the hands of the Republican-led state legislature. So these legislators are able to draw their own district maps. And with surgical precision, they are drawing these maps in a way that makes sure there is enough voters of their own affiliation to essentially guarantee and ensure their next electoral win. So last year when I was having conversations about options running for office, and I learned that there was no identified Democratic opponent to go up against Richard Hudson, he essentially was going to be running unopposed, that provided a unique opening for me to run as an independent against him. And the logic goes like this. Running as, in gerrymandered districts like what we have, running as a more centrist independent in the place of a Democrat makes the race more competitive. In theory, I would be getting the Democrat vote by default, and then appealing to what would be more of the moderate Republican portion of the electorate. This has been used before. A number of legislators in Alaska have won, independent legislators have won races like this. The recent Nebraska Senate race was set up this way, and Nebraska is a very, very, very red state. Ultimately, the Republican did win, but it was significantly more competitive and closer than it would have been if it were a Democrat or Republican. So under these conditions, the decision was made. I'm going to run as an independent in what would be like a head-to-head matchup, me against Republican incumbent. If, again, there was a Democratic challenger identified, then I would not have done this. The odds of an independent winning in a three-way race are like really, really low. There's a lot of dynamics as to why. I can get into that a little bit later. There was no Democrat, and so I began all the preparations for running. And in most states, running as an independent is actually really difficult to even get on the ballot. I like to say Democrats and Republicans don't agree on much these days, but they both agree on not wanting competition. So often the system makes it really hard for independents who want to run to even like be on the ballot and get in the mix. And North Carolina is no different. So for me, my minimum requirement was to get 7,500 signatures of voters in the district. Not all of those are going to be considered valid for winners in another. So we had a goal of 11,000 signatures. So there wasn't a lot of time to get that done. I began all the preparations of sourcing a company to help me do this and get ballot access. And I committed really the sum of my personal savings, which was a little over $100,000 to get all this going. Most of my team and consultants and stuff they are from more of the Democratic side of politics. And that's just by nature of I'm running against a Republican incumbent. So it was really hard for me to find Republicans who would be willing to help me. But everyone on my team, they were bought into, me running as an independent and understood like I'm not some Democrat puppet, I'm running as independent. So they had made sure to communicate to higher level Democrats in the state, do not worry about, stressing out to find someone who's going to run in District 9, because there is a gal identified who is going to be running against the Republican incumbent. So don't worry. It's unfortunately pretty commonplace that in a lot of these gerrymandered districts, races that are not competitive, it's hard for the disadvantaged party to often find people to even run for office, because again, you're most likely going to lose. So lots of times there ends up being a last minute scramble for people to find just a warm body, someone who's going to be willing to run and at least give voters a choice. So Feeling pretty good. And in North Carolina, the filing period for any sort of candidate who wants to run for office, it's 2 weeks long and it's in December. The 2 weeks had basically come and gone. It was the very last day of this 2-week period. It closed at 12 p.m. Refreshed it. We're in the clear. There's no Democrat that had entered the race. So we are off. But then later that night, hours after filing had closed, and then there was a name on there. I was genuinely quite surprised and wanted to understand who this is, what's going on. We were certainly not expecting a Democrat in the race and felt like we had, made it known that we were going to be running in this way. And so this gentleman notably does not even live in District 9. And just the appearances of, again, people filing the very last day and simply filling a spot does not yield itself to that this person had premeditated like intentions of actually running, or would necessarily be a serious competitive candidate. So after some consultation, the thinking was I still had to get all those signatures to even get on the ballot, and the clock was ticking. At this point, I had about 2 months, and there was no guarantee that I would even be successful getting all those signatures. I had never done this before. So the thinking was I'll push forward, see if I could even get on the ballot. If I don't, then that's good that there's this other person in the race now. Consider it an insurance policy, and people will have a choice. But if I do get on the ballot, one, that's pretty impressive. And then we can confront having conversations on the merits of making this, that competitive 2-person race. Okay, so we're now in January, and this is when the petition gathering process kind of happened in earnest. I did hire a company to help me get really what was supposed to be like the bulk of the signatures, and then I was responsible for a portion of them with volunteer help. And unfortunately, a lot of the signatures that the company was getting were coming up invalid. And so it just put more of the onus on me and the volunteers to help kind of like make up the difference. And we rose to the occasion. We were able to do that, but it took precious time away from me, from namely doing fundraising, which is like really important. You need to be able to fundraise to be successful as a candidate. So we ended up turning in the raw signatures March 5th. The count was just under 13,000, which that's a lot of signatures. And then from there, it took the State Board of Elections 2 months to validate all of those signatures and give me final and exact confirmation. So we're in May now, confirmation that I indeed am going to be on the ballot. But what's also really cool about this is I'm the only person who successfully has done this in North Carolina's history. So not only did we get the signatures done in the petition, but we made history doing it. Okay, so let's bring this back to the end goal here, which is how do we make this race here in District 9 as competitive as possible? Again, our theory of that is this head-to-head matchup, Republican versus independent. But this is new, this is non-traditional, and we can't just expect people to take our word for it. Like, we need to show a couple things. That's the responsible thing to do. There were 3 kind of criteria. One is getting on the ballot. And so we're now in May, we did that. And then we have to show I have credibility and viability and electability. And the ways you do that are through fundraising numbers. If people are willing to donate to your campaign, if you're the type of person that can actually bring in money and proper resources to be able to deploy in your race, that shows credibility and viability. And then also getting polling done. I'll start with fundraising. Fundraising is also made more difficult as an independent candidate. Not only did I have the extra hurdle of getting all of the signatures just to get on my ballot, neither of my opponents had to do that. For me, for fundraising, the hurdles that I immediately started to experience were things even that just like software that's proprietary for Republicans and Democrats, whether that's like credit card processors, whether that is management software of like historical donor base lists. And I had no access to any of that. Also, what's difficult is the parties can have pots of money that they can help support their candidates with. There's no like pot of money for independent candidates. And those pots of money from the parties can be unlimited amounts. Also, oftentimes people running with the party, namely incumbents, take like corporate PAC money. There's just like more institutional money for folks than they're running in a traditional way than independents. We had to be a lot more creative in our fundraising outreach and the donor bases that we were going to be pitching to. And so it took more work to find the right people and organizations that truly want to see like independent candidates break through. And most of the people that I'm having to reach for fundraising, there's campaign contribution limits. So most people don't know this, but the most any one person can donate to you and your campaign is $3,300. So it's not as easy as just finding like one high net worth individual that wants to bankroll you. It doesn't really happen that way. Now people can support you through these things called super PACs, and that's where you get like dark money, but those are often reserved for, again, helping either incumbents. They're not really there for independent candidates. So nevertheless, lots of hurdles for fundraising. Despite that, we actually did comparatively a pretty good job in raising money. By the end of the second quarter, so that was June 30th, our campaign raised we had over $308,000. To compare that, the Democrat in the race at this point in time raised $11,005. So that's a real significant difference. But I will say, Republican incumbent, he had just over $3 million. So there's a pretty decent spread between all of us at this point. Again, for our goal, we wanted to show, in comparison to the Democrat in the race, my viability and ability to fundraise was significantly better. And that's given with all of the advantages that he has with the party as well. So to us, that shows candidates that are not fundraising, especially when they ought to have the means to, shows maybe some concern in the their credibility or ability to even fundraise or like commitment to running. And last thing on fundraising, I had a very, very long list of people that were really intrigued with me as a candidate. Their only contingent for donating was it being a two-person race, because again, that trips it into now a competitive, in theory, competitive category. And it's just like making an investment. You know, you want to make a smart investment and bet on a winning horse. All right, now on to polling. So we paid to get some polling done. It was really important for us to have the data to show what's going to be the most competitive structure for this race. And so we had essentially 3 different scenarios. One of them was what would be the outcomes in a 3-way race. The outcome of that was a victory for the Republican and not one that included any sort of within the margin of error or closeness. The second scenario was a Democrat versus a Republican. Republican astoundingly won. Again, there's your gerrymandering at work there. And then the third scenario was Republican versus independent. Well, we were within the margin of error. So that means in this scenario, it was deemed a statistical tie. That is a competitive race. So now we have really our criteria to showcase this strategy and my credibility and viability as a candidate. So it was folks on my team, again, most of my team came from the Democratic side of politics, and then other people in Democratic politics who get this strategy were the ones taking this information to other kind of Democrats in the state and making a case for having their nominee step out of the race. Again, this is from a pragmatic way of making a very non-competitive district, because of the gerrymandering, now into one. Options are either like you're 100% going to lose sticking with your guy, or you have a potential chance of me defeating the Republican incumbent, and I'm at least more palatable in many ways than him. Again, I'm not running as a Democrat, but I do align with them on certain issues that are important, especially kind of pro-choice and more of the social issues. So to me, it's just a good strategy that I believe they would be interested in helping shape and make happen. The outcome of it all was pretty disappointing. So ultimately, there was no interest from the Democrat in the race to step out, which again, he doesn't even live in the district, has struggled fundraising, but I guess just failed to see sort of the bigger picture opportunity here. And that there was, or at least a thinking that because I'm in the race and I'm doing relatively well for an independent, that my success would pull enough votes from the Republicans for him to be victorious. Now, mind you, our polling did not show that to be true. And then it was also frustrating that, you know, people want to, I guess, try to get a win off the back of your like very, very hard work and, you know, personal financial sacrifices. Yeah, to no avail, the Democrats staying in, which frankly I thought was like really stupid. Again, I'm an independent, but just from a strategy standpoint, the Republicans are kicking Democrats' asses here in North Carolina, and also nationally, what we've seen with the presidential race this year. And when, you know, you can be a little bit more savvy on making things competitive, and an opportunity presents itself and it doesn't materialize, I'm like, oh, this kind of does not strategically make much sense to me. But alas, can't change that. And so for me, this was kind of a hard time. I struggled with, I really only do things in my life where I do them well and competitively. And now I find myself in a position, a three-way race that it's going to be extremely hard to win at. So do I keep pushing with like fundraising, campaign outreach? Mind you, I'm also pregnant then, and fatigue's hitting me really hard. I genuinely struggled with, is it good for me to stay in the race? Do I stay in the race knowing the outcome is probably not going to lead to a win? Or do I maybe hold on to the money I've raised right now and get out of the race and perhaps look at maybe running again at a later time? The notion of getting out did not feel good, like I was giving up on the commitment that I made to myself, to the people who signed the petition, to the people who invested in my campaign. But I definitely had to rethink about what success was going to look like. But I figured it still means something to even be out there, to have that microphone and talk about why so much of our Congress, our government, the kind of two-party system right now, partisan politics is failing us. I also helped, like with anything, like this is a skill and I'm learning a lot as a candidate, just, how to do interviews, talking to people, getting a feel for the electorate. And so anyway, as frustrating as things were, staying in was the right thing to do. So I still kept fundraising, although not as aggressively at this point. And I had to be very, candid with people as I'm asking for their financial support. This through a race, it's like most likely not going to yield a win, but we still think it's important for all these reasons. And with our resources, the resources that we amassed, we ended up spending it on a series of digital advertisements. We did a series of mailers, and then we had one cable ad that actually aired after the first presidential debate. But that's the name of the game. Like in politics, you want, and especially as an independent, really need to make sure that there is name recognition that you have with the electorate. So for us, it was vitally important that as many people as possible in the district, which this is a huge district, by the way, there's like over 500,000 registered voters. I mean, that is a lot of people. From bottom to top, it's about a 3-hour drive. And it's just, you have to have the resources in the millions of dollars to be able to effectively introduce yourself to that number of people. We're rolling into election time. So early voting was about 2.5 weeks long here in North Carolina. It started mid-October, and we had not paid for any additional polling. That was just a budget decision. So I truly had no idea really what to expect in terms of results. I personally would have been pretty happy if the results at least broke into the double digits. Overall, I ended up getting 6%, 6% of the vote. I did feel a bit disappointed, but I also knew that again, was a potential reality. I will say this, in the southern part of the district, like where I live, where more of, I would say I do have higher name recognition, we did do better. We pulled 13% of the vote. And then in the other neighboring kind of southern counties, cumulatively, we were at 10%. So we did hit the double digits that I felt would at least make me feel a little bit good. But overall, 6%, and that was kind of dragged down by a lower percentage of the votes in the more like northern counties that are just, frankly, there's a lot more distance from where I live and less of that name recognition. Another little thing on the results that made me feel better is I looked at all the other races in North Carolina that had a kind of third candidate option, and there were quite a few. I did the best. I think the second highest that someone yielded percentage-wise was like 2%. So, me coming in at 6 was significantly better. There's also just a lot of other handicaps and variables when it comes to what I guess the end results are, especially running as an independent. I talked about the handicaps with getting on the ballot, fundraising, but getting out the vote efforts is, I do not have access to party infrastructure like my opponents do. There's respective county parties. They have a volunteer base that they can get people to help with. They have software that they can use to help mobilize and do like canvassing efforts. And then also at voting sites and early voting sites or day of voting sites, they usually have a Republican and Democrat representative there that has sample ballots with their respective nominees, and they are like handing that out to people. I don't have the manpower infrastructure to have a respective representative at every single location for someone advocating on my behalf as well. So there's all these things that really stifle helping properly inform the electorate about me and my candidacy. And then there's voter psychology, which I think is very interesting. It's hard to parse the facts that nearly half of Americans are identifying as politically independent. 63% of Americans say that they don't believe the two parties are adequately representing us and would like to see a third party option, and the general level of dissatisfaction with our members of Congress. You would think that all of that would yield to voters, when they have a viable independent candidate option, that they would vote that way. That does not end up being the case, especially in a three-way race. And so there's a couple factors as to why. One is, the spoiler effect. If someone were to be voting for a third party candidate, that their likelihood of winning is really low. And so they would only be throwing away their vote and potentially helping someone of the opposite party make it into office. And, voters aren't wrong for thinking that, because we have yet to see a true independent actually break through and make it to office. So people aren't wrong to say, well, you're not going to win, but it's almost this self-fulfilling prophecy that the way for independent candidates to win are if you actually want to see an independent candidate, you need to vote for them. You have to vote for them. And I've spoken to many, many, many Republicans and Democrats that have both said, oh, Shalane, we really, really like you. We want to see you get elected. We like your candidacy, but there is a little bit of that reticence because of the spoiler effect. And then there's a lot of voters, and this is not demonizing people in any way, but a lot of voters, frankly, just are not that informed. I think if people were informed on the dynamics of the gerrymandering in this district, that they would consider voting for me, especially Democrats, because again, unfortunately, their candidate's not really viable to win because of the maps. But then also, a lot of voters will typically, they vote Democrat, Republican, and they'll just vote with whoever has the D next to their name or the R next to their name without researching the candidates themselves. And it was really interesting when I would talk to people and give them just a little bit of context on who my opponents were. And a lot of Dems did not appreciate that their candidate does not live in the district. They were surprised to learn that and thought that, how's it even allowed for someone to run where they don't live? But, it is allowed. And then on the Republican side, a lot of people were like, our guy's just only ever been a career politician. They didn't know that. A lot of them don't appreciate people that have only ever done politics their life. They believe in term limits. They don't want to see career politicians stay in office forever. And so having a little bit of that context on who you're voting for, regardless of the party affiliation next to their name, can make a difference. And so, I do believe in some wishful universe that if every single voter who cast their ballot here knew who I was and my opponents and all the candidates and were very informed, that we would have had a significantly better showing than what we did. So just wrapping it all up, I have a lot of reflection to do on this whole endeavor and where to kind of go next with it. I am open to running again. It's gonna have to be under really different circumstances. And I certainly won't run as an independent in a three-way race. Again, I never intended to do that, but things unfolded the way it did. And the big takeaway that I've learned is I would only consider running if there is a true viable path to victory. This is too hard of a thing to do just for the fun of it. And there is a lot of sacrifice that comes with it. I may consider the merits of running with a party just, for practical reasons. But what I am happy and proud of is, this is my first time kind of going into the public eye, getting in the political arena, and I've set a real foundation and baseline for sharing what I value. I'm an independent-minded person. I do not think that partisan politics is helping us, and even if I were to run with a party later on, I'm not going to ditch those values. So thank you all again for your support in this endeavor. Consider me a resource if you want to ask any questions on how this went down, or if you're interested in running, especially if you're a veteran. I think we need so many more veterans running for office. Wishing you all the best. And let's not let politics divide us more than it already has. We need to get above that. Okay, thank you.